The statements and opinions expressed in this episode are those of Dr. Sigman and his guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of Veradigm.
It's time to do healthcare smarter. This is Smart Medicine, hosted by Dr. Scott Sigman and powered by Veradigm. When you hear the phrase medical research, what comes to mind? For many, it's lab coats, clipboards, inconvenient travel time to major teaching hospitals. But the world of research is changing. With the help of today's and tomorrow's technology, research is moving its way into our homes and our local doctors' offices. On today's episode of Smart Medicine, we're exploring how clinical trials are evolving beyond the walls of academic institutions into something more accessible, tech-enabled, and yes, focused on the patient. And leading us through that transformation is one of the field's most respected voices, Craig Lipset. Craig is the co-founder of the Decentralized Trials Research Alliance, former head of clinical innovation at Pfizer, and a longtime advocate for innovation in research. From the basics of how trials work to the promise of something out of a sci-fi movie, you heard it here first. You can have a virtual digital twin to help with future research. We break down how these changes are reshaping medical research and how patients and your community doctors can participate. Today on the Smart Medicine Podcast, I'm thrilled to welcome a true visionary in the world of clinical research trials and digital health innovation. But I have to say, Craig, you got some work to do here. I'm not really sure what a decentralized clinical trial is, so we're gonna bring that up. We're excited to talk about that. With over 2 decades of experience across pharma, biotech, and venture capital, Craig's influence has brought him to be recognized by Pharma Voice as one of the 100 most inspiring people in life sciences. Craig, you are kind of a big deal in the research world. Welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much for letting me join the conversation.
Well, we are going to become the world's greatest healthcare podcast, and we're thrilled to have you on one of our earliest episodes of Series 1. So thank you for taking the time.
Well, hopefully I don't slow down that trajectory.
Oh, no, I love it. I can sense it. Our research has been done. We're excited to have you on. So we always like to sort of start at the beginning. And so there's not that many kids when they're growing up and going through college are sort of destined to become epidemiologists. So give us your story as how you got there. We know you went to Brandeis and then you got a degree from Columbia as well. So give us the story.
You know, I was an undergrad studying music at Brandeis. So what better career path than to wind up in clinical trial and clinical trial innovation? Although I will say, at one point in my journey when I was over at Pfizer and I had a fabulous team working on innovation in our development org, I did ask around at one of our offsites, hey, what were your undergrad majors? And over half of the team did major in fine arts. And so I'm sure there's a connection to be drawn there. But for me, that journey started sleeping and working night shifts as an EMT around the Boston area during college. And so sleeping in the firehouses and in and around Boston. But, you know, for me, the journey into medicine just seemed a little too, well, I'll say too people-y. It was too individualized. I was a little more drawn to public health and the idea that we could affect populations at a time. Now, interestingly, at some point along that journey, and it was probably during my time studying epidemiology at Columbia, that I started to get more exposure to drug development and clinical trials. And I was just fascinated in part by the pharmacoeconomics of it all. It was extraordinary to see the hundreds of millions of dollars being spent just to bring one molecule all the way through to the market. And to me, it just screamed opportunity. There was so much spend that there just had to be opportunities to do research in better and smarter ways.
Well, we can sense the passion in your voice. We may have been hanging out together at Harvard Square. I was at Tufts University around the same time. So who knows? We may have even had some friends. But I love that there's a liberal arts education really provides you the foundation to really be anything that you want to be. And from Tufts, for me, for example, with lawyers, doctors, business people in the arts, in the sciences, actors, it was really a great breeding ground for education for sure. So I love the passion of how you directed and moved your way into that. Now, look, man, we are fellow TEDx speakers. So you did yours a little earlier than mine. Mine's just a couple of years back, but I went back and listened to your TEDx talk. Donate your data, find a cure from 2015. So I want you to tell us a little bit about how your personal healthcare journey affected your passion for research. You state that the human body is the world's richest database. So tell us how by sharing your data, you were able to help and find a way to get yourself feeling better.
Well, thanks so much for that shout out. Maybe I get a nickel if you click and watch
You
TEDx.
got two extra. You got 2 extra views, dude. So you're good to go.
All right, let's go. Wow, I can't believe it's been a decade now since I did that talk on data access and data donation for research. But I have to say, it is starting to feel like that is the destiny. It feels like the threads are really coming together as never before. For me, the appreciation of that story, of that capability, really traveled with my journey as a patient with pulmonary sarcoidosis. And I was diagnosed now around 18 years ago. And like a lot of patients with a rare condition, it was a long diagnostic journey. And there were a lot of different data points that were gathered along that way. And as a bit of a nerd myself, I became committed to collecting every bit, every artifact of that data along the way, every image, every pulmonary function test, everything. And I firmly believed that in one way or another, this was going to shape and influence my journey as a patient. That journey gave me an appreciation for how patients are using their data in better and smarter ways, and an appreciation that I brought to that TEDx stage a decade ago now. That story about how when patients have access and control over their health data, they're willing to share that data to support research. And there is an asterisk to that. It has to be according to their terms, according to their wishes, in terms of how that data is used. But when we listen and we understand those wishes of the patient, it can unlock an incredible data mine, an incredible data resource for us. Nobody has access to the diversity of data about me like I do, whether it's across the different health systems where I've gone for care, the different pharmacies where I've picked up a prescription, the different devices that I've worn on my body. I am the true ultimate connector and collector of that data. And I'm the best arbiter in terms of deciding how and where it can get shared. Just give me those options.
It's fascinating because you were really ahead of your time. In 2015, EMRs were just sort of blossoming. We didn't have all the great technology that we have now, AI, et cetera, all of these things. So it was sort of the blossoming of the data that people could collect for themselves. And so I think that's great. Now, in your talk, there were 3 other points which I really enjoyed. And you basically said about the 3 important issues when it comes to sharing of patient data. First, that we as patients have unprecedented access to our own data. You just brought that up. 90% of patients are willing to share their data for research, and researchers want to have access to that data. But historically, the problem is there's been a gap in the communication of allowing those things to happen. How is technology going to help to eliminate that gap to bring everybody together so we can make a better difference on the planet?
Oh, it's a great question because we're seeing the impact of policy and technology in our lives as patients today. All of us have had some invitation at some point to click on a patient portal. And for some of us, we find ourselves using tools like MyChart more and more frequently. And in many ways, they're actually pretty good. But certainly as a resource for me to initially gain access to my data. But now we're starting to see this wide metaverse of different tools and apps that I, as a patient, can use to connect all of those different data streams. And I think I've got pretty much the metaverse of those on my phone right now, whether it's using just Apple Health or a range of other third-party apps. I'm connecting those different EHR streams. I'm connecting the device on my wrist, my scale, and other connected tools around my life to bring that data together. So that story about me being able to connect and collect my data is fast becoming a more and more accessible reality for so many patients today. That voracious appetite of researchers to gain access to data has not abated in the slightest over the last decade. In fact, it's gotten even stronger because researchers have gotten a taste of data in so many different ways. But there are so many pockets where it's hard. It's hard in many rare diseases to get a full picture around the patient. The best opportunity of all Come to me as a patient, include me in the process, ask me to share, and I'm going to, as you pointed out, 9 times out of 10.
It's funny. Doctors, we don't like to go to doctors, right? Because we're trained to find stuff, right? So 2024 was a tough year for me personally. Wound up having a cardiac event and had a 90% occlusion of my LAD. The Widowmaker was scheduled to have cabbage, triple vessel surgery. Wound up seeing Doogie Howser, who wound up sticking this awesome stent in my LAD and cured me, which was awesome. I had a basal cell carcinoma on my face that was identified. And then I had a 2-level cervical spine fusion done down in New York towards the end of the year. So
that was your year? That was your
my
2024?
Well, I hadn't been to the doctor 10 years previous. So I finally went and they started finding stuff. But God bless, everybody took great care of me. But I was experiencing exactly what you're saying, multiple EMRs and trying to remember passwords and clicking in. Am I in the right thing? I'm with my chart now. And now there's all these great tools that my cervical spine doctor was able to send me questionnaires, which I felt compelled to answer because I wanted to provide him the data that he was looking for to be able to create outcome reports, et cetera. So the good news is 2025 is Fro 2.0. I'm feeling great. I've had a lot of stuff done. We're moving forward and it's all great. But look, I think that's a great description. And I want to move into maybe a little bit of the history. Let's keep it simple here. Why are we, first and foremost at the core, why are we doing clinical research? And then if you could give us a description, I'm going to use the term analog. We're in a digital world right now, but the analog clinical trial that has been done for timeless decades on how things get approved by the FDA. So give us a little traditional analog, how it used to be and why we're doing research.
Absolutely. Look, there's a lot of different types of research, and we do research, right, to answer questions. But we do clinical trials in particular to test some sort of intervention. And so we can separate the research universe into things like observational and real world studies, where we're just looking to understand more about people. And in some cases, that might just be in their journey with a particular health condition. But for folks like myself that are focused more on clinical trials in that research universe, we're more interested in understanding an intervention. And if we introduce something different in your journey, maybe it's a procedure, maybe it's a new medication, how do things change as a result? And that's the nature of clinical trials. When we're developing, for instance, a new medicine out of the laboratory, we're often thinking about these different phases of clinical trials. And some in the audience, I'm sure, have heard things like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, because we do tend to break these out into these 3 steps, if you will. The first 2 are really focused on safety. That phase 1 study is pretty small in terms of number of patients, but pretty intensive, because those are the times where we're really first introducing that medicine to people. But then as we get into phase 2, we're looking at larger numbers of patients, still heavily focused on safety. When we get to phase 3, much larger numbers, but now we're starting to look at efficacy and how does this new medicine, this new intervention actually improve things for people. Now, the traditional model for these studies has been we choose research centers. Typically, these are your big academic medical institutions. We find the smartest doctor in the building to be our investigator. And those investigators have to go out with their staff and find patients to get them to enroll in that trial. And that patient goes through an informed consent process. But then they're coming in and out of that research center on a schedule in order for different procedures to happen, for different measurements to happen, to get their study medication. And we're collecting data throughout. That data that we collect really leans into this theme of endpoints. How can we best monitor you for your safety and your efficacy while you're on the trial? Because that investigator, aside from just being a great doctor, has a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. Safety around the ethics and the care that you're receiving, and also responsibility around the integrity of the data that we're collecting. But those trials can be really hard to enroll. And in large part, they're really hard to enroll because we're typically locked in to this small number of locations that we've preordained and pre-selected, and this finite number of doctors to be investigators.
So I'll give a little summary. I love doing that. So first and foremost, the old school research, right? You're talking about whether it's a medical device, a new technique, or perhaps a new drug in those spaces. We first of all want to know if it's safe, right? Can we use this in humans? We're going to use it in animals first. We're going to do all these other clinical trials. And then at one point or another, we have to branch off into our species and try it. We want to know if it's going to work, right? Is it going to make a difference? Will it do what it's supposed to do? Will it make somebody better, hopefully, cure a disease, or make some sort of a surgical intervention that's better? Primarily, it's been going to large academic centers, which creates a significant limitation on a large number of doctors who may want to be involved in research, who are in private practice. So that's the sort of the traditional way of doing things. And now we've got this decentralized trial that we've been talking about. So listen, I want to be very clear about this. The two best years of an orthopedist's life are fourth grade. So you gotta dial this down so we can understand. I always say that my mother, Judy, is listening. So she has to be able to understand your explanation. So give it to us. Decentralized trials for our listeners.
Okay, Mrs. Sigman, wherever you are, this one is for you.
Okay, I love it.
So remember that traditional clinical trial, there's a lot of burden involved. Some of the main reasons that patients struggle to participate is just accessing the research institution. And enter now this era around our ability to decentralize research. And when we think about decentralizing, we're really talking about distributing the ability to participate so that it's no longer anchored and centered around a research institution, around a big academic medical center, but that now participation can just be more distributed. And how do we power that? We make that happen by using what we're calling today different types of decentralized tools and elements in our studies. So what does that mean? That means that, for instance, some of those visits maybe are taking place from home because you're using video to interact with your providers. And when they have different types of measurements, maybe they're using that connected device like a blood pressure cuff, a pulse ox, a digital stethoscope to be able to collect those important vital signs, but without you having to travel in order for that to happen. Those types of elements, using video, using visiting nurses, using a connected device, are some of the cornerstones of decentralized methods. Maybe that location could even be your local community physician's office, that local healthcare provider who today may not be an investigator in a clinical trial, but maybe some of the more routine care procedures that are a part of that study, that physical exam, that blood draw, could happen in his or her office, which is closer to home, familiar, and trusted by you. And so, as sponsors of research today, most are increasingly looking at the burden of those visits in their study protocols and where and how can I introduce these types of decentralized methods.
Craig has given us a powerful look at how clinical trials have evolved and what's driving that change. I especially love that the real fuel behind these new clinical trial designs is patient access and representation. By bringing trials into patients' homes, to your local doctor's offices, and even through video visits, participation is no longer limited to big city hospitals and geography. As Craig mentioned, even something as simple as shifting to video can increase efficiency. This got me thinking, what other technologies are set to transform this space? And more importantly, why hasn't adoption of this new user-friendly type of research been as fast as we might expect? Before we dive in, this episode of Smart Medicine is powered by Veradigm. If you're a payer, provider, or life sciences company ready to harness technology and data, connect with the Veradigm team. Now let's get back to it. What I'm hearing is that we're trying to make research more user-friendly, right? So that patients don't have to go to the big white building with all the sick patients in it, with all the high academics, right? Make it simple, make it easier. Get the data from the patient in a place in which they're comfortable. So my 84-year-old mother, Judy, can be enrolled in a study and feel pretty comfortable that she doesn't have to go someplace every time she's going to be enrolled. So I love that. That's a great segue now for us to talk a little bit about technology and the advancement of technology and how it's affecting clinical research. And I would argue it's been a little sluggish for traditional clinical research. And so it's exciting to hear about this. I do some work for a new pharma company, Vertex. They're not new, but they have a new product the first new oral pain medication and classification in 20 years. It just was finally FDA approved. It took them, I went to the speaker bureau, it took them 27 years to run through the compounds and to eventually get to the point where actually it was 20 years to get the compound and then another 10 years to sort of get across the starting line. I don't like to call it a finish line. And so I think with the AI technology right now, if they took those compounds that took 20 years, they could probably do it in 20 minutes now with AI computing, right? I mean, so what a wonderful way to be able to sort of incorporate. So how do you see technology working its way into clinical research that's going to really make a difference?
This is such a great question. And you're absolutely right. When we think about bench science and what's happening in the research labs, the opportunities for AI, for instance, to improve our knowledge and pace of screening different molecules is game changing. But sometimes it feels like innovation grinds to a halt when we move from research to development, when we make that switch, that translational switch from our activities happening in that tightly controlled environment of the laboratory and now have to open it up for people to get enrolled as patients and participants at research institutions around the world. And all of a sudden, all of those different variables start to come in. And we start to get really anxious about the middle initial of an RCT, a randomized controlled trial, right? And we want that control. And when we start to lose that control, we really start to get worried about data integrity. And do we really have confidence in the oversight and the measurements that are happening? And I think for a lot of these reasons, we really stalled and left behind so many technologies that seemingly are right at our feet, right at the doorstep. I shared a moment ago about some of these different decentralized elements. And I did tease a bit that these don't seem like rocket science, and in many ways, they aren't. They've been at our doorstep for years. It really took a global pandemic to catalyze the adoption and to get people to realize that I can bring these into my organization and navigate compliance and privacy and regulatory requirements to make those work. Now you describe enter this time of artificial intelligence. Is that going to sit at the doorstep? Because the winners in the race to develop medicines in better and smarter ways aren't necessarily those that can scurry about and find the best technology hidden in the forest. It's the ones who can adapt, because the opportunities for AI in drug development today in clinical trials are profound, right? Some of it will start with better design and planning of our studies. Some of it will enable much better oversight, whether for patient safety or for other reasons, to have robust tools that are constantly watching data. Some of it will be about trial efficiency because we'll have more companions and co-pilots doing busy work in real time and perhaps with better quality along the way. But some of these use cases will be game changing. And not that those other examples won't be good, but there's a lot of incremental there. The game changing will be when we start to think, do I really have to enroll patients in this trial? Can I start to create synthetic data, digital twins of you and me, and start to imagine futures where maybe I don't need as many people in the control arm of my study. Maybe I don't need a control arm at all. Will we look back on these days of introducing medicines to humans in this way and scoff at the lack of humanity of not using machines in their place?
It's fascinating because you sort of rolled right into one of the thoughts that I had as well, which is at this stage, whether it's my 20-year-old son at University of Miami calling and asking for help on his CV, what do? We throw it into ChatGPT and bada bing, a letter of recommendation for my intern that's working with me. It's amazing what you can do with artificial intelligence and how I'm using it in my day-to-day world. So my question is, we have these EMRs that have tremendous amounts of data that have been collected. And could we, and I think you answered the question in a respect, what if we can, in a HIPAA compliant way, unleash AI into these EMRs that we've developed over decades and just be able to create and find incredible information? So, for example, I know at the VA, they're carefully tracking GLP-1s, the Ozempics, et cetera. And they're looking at cohorts, the ones that have had it and the ones that haven't, and they can identify reduction in liver disease and cardiac disease and obesity and diabetes. And it's like, this is a treasure trove of information that we could potentially use. Is that something that might come down the pipeline?
I think that we see today already incredible use cases, even prior to this amazing era of artificial intelligence, amazing use cases just for using existing real world data from electronic health records and other sources. And today, those opportunities are even bigger than they ever were. Right? Whether it's to understand natural history, whether it's to generate and test and challenge different hypotheses, but now powered by AI.
I was super impressed with Craig's thoughts on AI, so let's do a deeper dive. In this segment, we look further into how AI may be used in research. So how is AI being applied to modern clinical research? Earlier this year, McKinsey released a study on exactly this topic. They saw companies using AI and real-world data to optimize clinical trial endpoints and to shorten the time needed for the research to be completed by as much as 15 to 30%. Even more impressive, AI was helping researchers better identify patients with unmet clinical needs. So when this technology is used correctly, it helps us to identify what we should be researching in a shorter time frame and is therefore more efficient for doctors and patients. To me, the addition of AI to medical research feels like smart medicine.
And today, those opportunities are even bigger than they ever were. Right? Whether it's to understand natural history, whether it's to generate and test and challenge different hypotheses, but now powered by AI, we have incredible examples of groups that are doing drug repurposing at extraordinary scale. One example I'll call out of the University of Pennsylvania is the work of David Feigenbaum leading a nonprofit called EveryCure. And at EveryCure, they're building a massive AI-powered machine to be able to look at the universe of existing drugs and the universe of diseases that have unmet medical needs and start to prioritize which of these molecules really are a good scientific match for being a repurposed drug. And by repurposed drug for Judy, I'm talking about a medicine that's already approved. We already know its safety and efficacy in one disease, but maybe that statin that you're using over here for your high cholesterol actually can help in preventing Alzheimer's. And so I really love models that can get to large scale, but include me as a patient in the process. Come and get my permission. Let me participate because when you do, I can share even more data with you than just what's in that electronic health record. And then the universe is really ours. Now, one of the examples I kind of teased a moment ago is, can you create digital twins about me when you have that type of electronic health record? Now, digital twins aren't a new idea. For folks that work in automotive industries and aerospace, people have been creating digital twins of jet engines and BMWs for years. It's basically, can we monitor on a computer everything that we need to monitor about that real life machine that's down the street or up in the air because of sensors and other data we're collecting about it? And a digital twin of a human now seems like more and more of a reality. Can you basically have enough data about me and basically render a digital version of me? And if you could, what could that digital twin of myself start to do? Are there futures where my digital twin is enrolled in your next clinical trial in the control arm? Where else can we start to imagine these futures where a digital twin coupled with simulation could actually have that next new drug introduced to them?
I would love my digital twin to bring the garbage cans in for me on Mondays. That wouldn't be so bad either.
Pay the bills on Tuesday, right? We can line up a lot of chores for
There's
them.
a lot of things that we could do. What's funny, and I even harken back, I mean, one of the things that really stuck with me is like identifying a medication that's being used for another issue. Think about even like in COVID, it seems like such a long time. It's been 5 years. And AI really was not, where it is now in 2020. And wouldn't it have been remarkable to be able to run through all of these medications and perhaps seeing if there were other medications that could have been helping us to use a cure for COVID-19 as well? All right, look, let's go a little bit more grassroots here, okay, as far as research is concerned. And most of the research, as we've stated, comes from the big white buildings and the academic centers. And But there's a lot of information that our private practice doctors, our community doctors are doing, yet they're not really involved on a day to day. The other thing I can tell you is that as a clinician, every day I'm asked to do more stuff and I'm getting threatened to be paid less. And that's the federal government's philosophy when it comes to payment for physicians. So wouldn't it be kind of a neat idea if we could really get the community doctors to be more involved in some of these decentralized studies that you're talking about? And hey, is it kosher? Can I get paid? Can I be reimbursed for my time for humanity to try and come up with new ideas and concepts?
Oh, this is such an exciting time in so many ways because when we think about it's so hard to find patients to participate in trials, is it really? Patients exist. We are clearly designing these studies for real world indications where there must be patients because companies expect there to be a commercial market for that drug once it's approved. The challenge isn't that patients don't exist, it's that they're not at our investigator sites. They're at practices all around the country, all around the world. The challenge is those providers, those doctors, nurse practitioners, PAs that are seeing those patients aren't the investigators in the trial. And in a traditional fee for service market like we have in the United States, there can be a lot of perceived disincentives for a practice in terms of referring a patient somewhere else just because there's a clinical trial for which that patient may be eligible. Now, enter this new era with decentralized clinical trials. Last fall in September of 2024, the FDA released two guidance documents: a final guidance document on decentralized clinical trials and a draft guidance document on randomized clinical trials in routine care settings. Both of these guidance documents unlocked this exciting new opportunity for healthcare providers, HCPs in the community, to participate in clinical trials by supporting routine care activities that may be involved in the study. So, what the heck am I talking about? And why is this such an exciting opportunity? So, in a clinical trial protocol, we lay out this visit schedule and we say on visit one, the following things need to happen. And some of those things may be really special, customized, study specific procedures, like involving a certain type of scan that may not exist somewhere else. But most of those things are pretty routine care activities, right? It could be a blood draw, a physical exam, a type of imaging that's routinely performed. Now, typically, because it's written in a study protocol, we tell the patient, go to that big white ivory tower down in the big city, travel your hour and a half to get there because we're going to do a physical exam, a blood draw, and an x ray. And thanks to these new guidance documents, we can see a better way. And that better way may be for some patients to go to your local healthcare provider to do those routine care activities for which they can be reimbursed fairly for their time and for the procedure. Now, why is this so exciting for us? Because now, if you're that local community doc who in the past maybe somebody sent you a letter and said, hey, I'm down at this ivory tower and I've got a clinical trial. So if you have patients that look like A, B, and C, send them my way, which sounded like patient leakage, kind of a bad term in the world of healthcare in America. Now it's no longer that. Keep your patient in your practice. Maybe they'll come to my location for a couple of study specific procedures, but otherwise, this patient is yours and you'll continue to bill for routine care activities. Now, as you pointed out, you've got a lot of things going on in your practice today. And so, for these models to work, for this future to work, we have to make this as low friction as possible. We have to compensate those practices fairly for their time. And if we can achieve those two goals, I think that this will truly and in a meaningful way unlock participation and make access completely different for most people in this country and hopefully eventually around the world.
Great, great commentary. So let's go back to Judy now. Okay. So we've talked about how research is affecting the doctors now in the communities as well. How's clinical research going to affect our patients? Especially at the end of the day, that's what we need. They're the center of our research when it comes to clinical trials. So, how can we get the patients to want to be more involved as well? Can they be compensated for their time and inclusion? And of course, as you started off very early in your TEDx talk, their data?
This is a great topic here, right? Right. What is the get for a participant to join into a research study? And for some, it's hope. For some, it's access to an investigational new medicine. For some, it's simply wanting to contribute for the future, for a better future of healthcare for their children or for their other family members. But in truth, there are other tactical needs that many patients have along the way in terms of being compensated fairly for their time, reimbursed for travel, and other essential costs. There are policy changes that are on the table in Washington and elsewhere to help make sure that the reimbursements that patients may receive are not taxed against them as income. Because for those patients who may be on Medicaid or SNAP or other benefits programs, it can actually count against them for being able to maintain those benefits if clinical trial reimbursements are considered taxable income. And so there are some exciting improvements out there along those lines as well. But I think some of the more progressive folks out there appreciate that for patients who are participating in research, who are bringing data in to share for research, data has value. And so if data is a valuable resource, should I, as a patient, be able to participate when my data is being monetized? And so in a free market, what's that data's value? And if it is going to be traded and exchanged, should I be compensated in some way in return for making it available? Now, that may seem distasteful to some. That may feel inducement, like trying to bait patients to participate into research simply because I'm throwing money at them. Nobody's going to get rich, by the way, sharing their data for research. This is about equity and fairness. And in truth, their data is being monetized already. They're just not being invited to participate. And so I think that's the shift that I'm expecting to see over time.
Yeah, great explanation. So there's a lot of change that's occurring at this point right now. And I think it's fascinating to be able to see all the different aspects, whether it's the research coordinators, the doctors, the community, the patients, all trying to work together for better. So one of the other things that seems to be a very crowded space when it comes to clinical research and new technology is wearables, and also perhaps the software that goes along with those types of wearables as well. I can speak from the orthopedic surgeon's perspective. Zimmer Biomet, which is one of the large medical device companies now, actually is installing a chip inside of their knee replacements so that we can literally follow the range of motion, the steps, the longevity, the loosening of that prosthesis over time. So, talking about your digital twin, we'll be able to sort of perhaps grab data that we weren't able to before. Do you see that these wearables are advantageous for us in these decentralized clinical trials as we move forwards?
I think that these wearables will become just a cornerstone in terms of how we're able to better monitor patients for efficacy and safety and better understand our ability to collect endpoint data, to collect those measurements with much higher frequency than when we typically only get that data point once every 6 weeks when a patient comes into the clinic. And we know that there's inherent bias to that data because the patient's body isn't the same, right? In many cases, they may have just traveled a long distance, taken the subway across town, and walked all the way up 3 flights of stairs to get to the clinic. That's a different time to measure than our ability to collect with higher frequency in a more continuous way. Now, these connected devices really, in fact, open up two different opportunities for us. We can think about the knowns and the unknowns that we can measure, right? Our knowns are, is there a physiologic data point like blood pressure or heart rate that now I could just collect in a much more accessible and higher frequency way by using a connected blood pressure cuff, a connected watch, a connected scale. But in many ways, these start to unlock new types of endpoints for us, new types of measurements. And so I do think we'll see more and more gradual adoption of these different types of connected devices. And when we do, our endpoints, I think, are more reliable, but also our participation is made so much easier and more accessible because I'm not schlepping all the way to that big academic center just to give you some data that I could have beamed to you right now while we're chatting on the phone.
This has been awesome, Craig. We're sort of coming to a close here, and I'm going to sort of push you a little bit. So you may be happy, may not be happy, but there's the theoretical. You're getting a call from President Trump. You've just been nominated to be the clinical research czar of the United States. What are you going to say to the American people about how you want to develop this system moving forwards? You're going to be talking, obviously, to the federal government, to higher educational institutions, payers, big pharma companies. So you got a lot going on here, Craig, but give it to us short and sweet. Where do you see the future of clinical research with all of these partners coming together to try and help humanity?
In the near term, we're going to talk about trust and bilateral sharing here. In the near term, we're going to talk about trust because of transparency. We're going to talk about trust because we may be collecting data from you, but we're sharing those data and those results back with you, both you, the individual, and you, the community at large. There's nothing to hide here. And that's increasingly true because just as you mentioned earlier, you can't hide anything anymore. Once that data is on the market, large amounts of real-world data, electronic health data, is going to be collected and studied in a continuous way. If there's something to be found, it's going to be found. And so we can be transparent very early on as researchers and sharing the learning, sharing the data, sharing the insights. But as your new czar for clinical research, I'm going to give you a much more exciting picture of the future. Because today, research studies are little silos that are redundant and inefficient, hard to find, in little pockets all around the country. And what we can start to envision for us is a much easier way to connect, opt in, and participate in research. I shouldn't have to say that I want to be in Pfizer's trial here and Merck's trial there and Sanofi's trial here. I should be able to say, I want to participate in research. And that should mean something because now I can opt into a platform that I know and trust where I can share my health data. And if there's an intervention that's right for me, a new drug or repurposed drug or otherwise, to be able to make an informed decision, have access to that, but to keep sharing on the same trusted platform. In today's world, we try to pull people out of registries and throw them in another research study and get them to share trust and share data there. But in truth, as we think about this potential of platform studies, of master protocols where we can run different interventions hanging off of one trusted ecosystem, there are much easier futures for us where we can enable everyone in our country to have equitable access to be able to participate in research in a trusted way.
Well, Czar Craig Lipset, that is well said, brother. Look, you put the passion and the excitement into research in a way that I personally have never heard it before. We're thrilled that we could be able to share what your vision is of research and how technology is truly making a difference and how we're going to bring in community physicians in getting our patients and their data involved in what should be a brand new world within research. But we can't thank you enough for taking the time to spend with us and educate our listeners today on all the things you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Scott, and thank your mom, Judy, for listening today. It was really a treat to be here with you.
I love speaking with healthcare leaders who are truly passionate about what they do, and Craig is no exception. His insights on how to make clinical research smarter opened up an entire new way of thinking about how patients can see real-time benefits from their own data. Whether it's harnessing insights from AI or breaking down the silos around patient information, I'm hopeful we're moving towards the future that Czar Greg has outlined. This is Dr. Scott Sigman. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Smart Medicine. If you're enjoying the show so far, be sure to follow us. And if you're really liking it, maybe leave us a rating or a review. Till next time.